And then I can think of it as a community of people all working very hard every single day. We've got about 75 people around the world who work for Worldreader, and they're part of a particular form of a community, a set of interlocking teams that all help us make our mission come true.
So we put up $1 million and we said, anyone who commits to moving the money out of their donor advised funds, half their DAF, we will start matching wherever they're giving.
It's such a pleasure to have you. We met David through Bhanu about 4 years back in Delhi at an event that Worldreader had organized, and Bhanu sort of orchestrated, led the entire thing. And I'm so glad that we're all here together. I would have preferred physical meetup, but all our fellows are in different parts of the world. So we're delighted to have you with us via Zoom.
It's great to be here. It's great to be here, Kosh. And I agree.
Yeah.
I wish we were there physically. That's the only bummer. It's not nearly as fun from 7,000 miles away. But anyway.
Yeah. So David and Jen, like, you're such an interesting couple. I have so many questions to ask you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having us. And I'm already so impressed with what everyone's doing. So many important pieces of work are going on here. And I love the community piece. And it makes me think, just recently, I've been involved in a community of women, just a small cohort of us, learning about how to align our money with our values and going through our portfolios and thinking about impact investing and angel investing and things I know nothing about. And being in a community, learning with other women is very powerful. So that piece about community, I am 100% with you, and it's so important. Especially when you think of something like investing, where there's so many kind of technical terms and so much jargon thrown around that often we just stay quiet because we don't want to sound unknowledgeable. And that's a problem. So I think, accepting as women that maybe we don't know and we're in a space of not knowing, and we're learning. I think that's powerful too. And so I just really appreciate that community feel. And we'll talk about what David and I have been doing with HalfMyDAF, and I'm doing a lot of work right now to get conversations started about money and wealth, because we don't talk about it. Certainly in the United States, it's a taboo subject, but I'm hoping to move it out of that taboo category and help us connect and learn from each other.
Yeah, and that's one important piece of your book, right? Which I think everybody should read. It's just like, it's amazing. I didn't know that there were 11 million million dollar plus households, not counting real estate. It's amazing, the stat. In 2016, that too.
Exactly.
Yeah. And David?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, where to start? I have the very lucky, so also thank you for inviting both of us. And thank you, Bhanu, as always, for being such an incredible connector and inspire in so many ways, personally and professionally. My sort of, I'll maybe just start right where I am right now, which is, of course, I spend most of my energy on Worldreader, trying to get 1 billion people reading, really unlocking the opportunity of kids all around the world. And it's really interesting to think about that as a couple of sort of nested communities to sort of drill down on that for a second, and then I'll kind of zoom out again. But we can think of it as a community of readers, people, all of whom are sort of sharing what we hope is ultimately a love of reading that will unlock their potential. We can think of it as a community of donors as well. And it's actually interesting, Srichand, I want to talk about one of our donors in particular who actually suffers from ADHD, and she recently revealed this to me, and I want to tell you a little bit about her story as a way to sort of link our donor community to sort of our impact community. And then I can think of it as a community of people all working very hard every single day. We've got about 75 people around the world who work for Worldreader, and they're part of a particular form of a community, a set of interlocking teams that all help us make our mission come true. So that's probably my single biggest focus. Jen and I also work together on HalfMyDAF, which we can talk about a little later. And then, as some of you know, at least the people that I've gotten a chance to meet in the past, my sort of past came from a combination of technology and reading and education. I worked at Microsoft for many years, where Jen and I met, worked at Amazon for many years, where we helped grow that company to a lot bigger than it was when I started, and have done a bunch of other things. But maybe I'll just sort of stop there.
Yeah, awesome. And what is HalfMyDAF, and like how did that start? How did you both started brainstorming about it?
Well, actually, yeah, it started this about this time last year, when COVID hit and San Francisco locked down March 16th. So we were sheltering in place. And this was the time when, and Dave and I were sitting out in the backyard. This is the time when, the stock market was crashing. So donors were kind of nervous and there's a lot of uncertainty. And David could feel it. It was impossible for nonprofits to do any fundraising. So they couldn't hold their luncheons. They couldn't get out and talk to donors because everyone was, sheltering, and the need was greater than ever. And our hearts were just going out to nonprofits, and we were sitting in the backyard just thinking, what can we do? How can we, make a difference and help people who are helping the people who are most in need? And we'd already started to double down, give to places we already were giving to, accelerating those gifts that we kind of had for 3-year out commitments. But we wanted to do more, and we really wanted to give to nonprofits. And at the same time, we were highly aware of money that was sitting in donor advised funds. And a donor advised fund here in the United States is this charitable vehicle. It's sort of like a charitable checking account. So your financial advisor might come to you and say, this is a good year to put some money into a donor advised fund because you get your tax break up front, or you get a windfall, something happens and you want to give charitably. You can put that money into this fund and then give over time. So it's sort of an organizing mechanism. You get your tax break up front and then you can give over time. But the problem is people are getting that tax break. They're putting the money into donor advised funds and then they're not moving it through. There's no payout requirement. So it can sit there, and there was $140 billion sitting in donor advised funds throughout this country. And there's over 870,000 donor advised fund accounts across this country. So we were highly aware of all this money that's just stuck. So we thought we could kind of combine the two. We'd try and encourage people to give from their donor advised funds. So we put up $1 million, and we said, anyone who commits to moving the money out of their donor advised funds, half their DAF, we will start matching wherever they're giving. So people make that commitment and then they give wherever they want. We said, give to the organizations you care about most, as long as it doesn't support hate speech or gun violence. And your organization will be eligible for a match from us. So that
match from, like, you say your family fund, the Risher family fund. Is that right?
It was, right. Yes. So we put up $1 million towards that to match. And that $1 million in 5 months, we started this last May. We built a website, and we told people they need to commit to halving their DAF by September 30th. That $1 million turned into $8.6 million, moved from donor advised funds to nonprofits in just 5 months.
That's incredible. Wow. How did you do that? I know.
Well, you know what? Part of it was the community that started to build around this. And that was a really rewarding piece of the success that we saw, because donors kept telling us, oh, wow, we're inspired. This is the nudge we needed to get that money moving. It feels good to be giving. And we're sitting at home around the dinner table with our adult kids, because we're all sheltering in place. We're talking about money in a way that we normally don't. We're talking about our values and where we want to give. So the donor community was really, coming together around this. And then there's also this beautiful kind of partnership happening with nonprofits and donors. So this was the perfect tool for a nonprofit to go to their donor and say, do you have a donor advised fund? Here's, let me tell you our story. Can you help us now? Because if you help us now, we'll be eligible for a match. So it was kind of a building of a partnership between nonprofits and donors as well.
I think it's really, I mean, it exceeded our expectations by a lot. And I think if you sort of break it down, and I mean, as we listen to the good work that people on this call are doing, you might be interested in kind of understanding what the steps are to build a community like that. And so if you sort of break it down, I mean, first, well, as Jen said, it started with an idea. I mean, it really did. It started with an idea, and the idea had the benefit of being something that was, it felt innovative. It felt like something new, something that hadn't been done before. It wasn't sort of a Me Too, kind of a copycat of something. This was an unlimited match. There was a fairly good sum of money, put up against it, but I don't think it was the size of the dollar amount as much as it just was this idea that we'll match anything. So that felt, so it started with kind of an innovation, hadn't been done before. Then we actually did some fairly targeted outreach, I would say, in two directions, once we built the website and so forth. One was to friends, to people that we knew who could be sort of early adopters of this, kind of early users of it. And that was good because it started to show some momentum right out of the gate. In the first couple of days, we got a number of people who both put in they put in to HalfMyDAF to have their donations matched. We also got a couple of friends who came in and said, you know what, I want to help you with that $1 million. I actually want to give you a little bit more money. We ended up with $1.4 million in the end, fairly quickly, from people, either friends or let's say friends of friends, that pretty quickly saw this was something kind of cool. So that was one direction we kind of reached out, as kind of to friends, people we knew directly, including some influencers. Come back to that in a second. The other was to the press. And I mean, this is basic stuff, right? But because of our work at Worldreader, over the years, there have been many people who've written about the organization. And so I reached out to a lot of them personally and said, this is something that's different from Worldreader, has nothing to do with it, except that this is another charitable thing. It's really meant to inspire people to give wherever, not just to Worldreader. Anyway, and that created some momentum around it. And I think maybe in the first week, we had, I don't know, 3 to 5 pretty good articles from very reputable Chronicle of Philanthropy. And then other people started that kind of built on itself.
Well, I just want to add, it was creative, but we didn't realize that. I mean, it was like, we had this idea, let's do this thing. And it wasn't really like, oh, we have this great creative idea. It was a little bit of a surprise at how it was taken in the world of philanthropy, which I think tells me more than anything that the world of philanthropy is a little bit stuck and archaic. There's not a lot of new things going on there. So
I agree. We didn't pitch this as innovative. We just pitched this as an interesting thing that we thought was cool, and maybe other people did too. And then there was a third thing that started to happen, which is some of the early people we spoke with were representative of other nonprofits. And so, we were talking, in fact, the way we wrote the website originally was very focused on donors. If you're a donor and you want to leverage your money, here's something cool that you can do. But what we began to understand pretty quickly is that there are thousands of nonprofits just in the United States who barely understood this mechanism of donor advised funds themselves. And there was a huge hunger and interest in that. And so we then started to set up a series of webinars and kind of communication events with nonprofits who then turned into kind of advocates for us. They were sort of our standing army, right? Because all of a sudden so if you sort of, you see this, it's kind of a friends thing, it's kind of a press thing, but then it was also very importantly finding other people. And again, this was sort of more luck than strategy, but finding other people who were very motivated to tell the story themselves, in this case, other nonprofits, because it allowed them to reach out to donors and raise their own profile and so on and so forth. And so now all of a sudden we had sort of these 3 different things all working together to advance this shared purpose. And I think I'll just sort of end here by saying that I think if you think of a community as an as a group of people working with shared purpose, I think that's a very powerful and simple way to think about it. And you have to sort of figure out how to get this, how to identify this purpose, and then identify community, organizations, people, and so forth, who can share this purpose and help you amplify it. And that's how it started to really build on itself.
That's amazing, David. I just realized that the first time we met was actually in Davos a few months before Delhi.
Right.
And I mean, if I go back to that particular dinner with Jean-Philippe, I still remember a lot of your points, and the things that we discussed were essentially community building. That was David. That was for Worldreader, and now it's for HalfMyDAF.
Right.
If you were to look at it as a case study now of how, say, HalfMyDAF became a thing, how would you say you balanced both? If you balanced the believers versus skeptics, I would imagine there would be some believers, some skeptics. What should community builders focus on, and how might we sort of tackle skeptics, if there are any?
Focus on the believers.
Totally.
And it wasn't only skeptics, it was people who kind of didn't want this to happen. And those were the very—
Why is that, Jen? Why is
Well,
that?
those are and they're the very people we thought we'd partner with.
Yeah.
So we
Right.
initially thought, okay, who are we going to partner with? We're going to partner. So there's 3 different types of donor advised funds. There's the kind of big national funds like Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, and then there's community foundations. And these are DAFs that are held within communities. They focus locally on giving. And then there's single interest funds, like they often are religious or educational, like Stanford has a DAF.
Yeah.
So we thought we'd partner with these DAF holders, and we really hope to partner with Fidelity and Vanguard, because
Which
they
is
have
the biggest. Fidelity itself, so Fidelity, huge institution, one of America's biggest private companies. They have a DAF portfolio that's over $100 billion big themselves. So
Wow.
they're effectively a bank, a huge player in the space.
huge player, and they make a lot of money on the money that's sitting in donor advised funds. So David did some calculation. It's like they probably make $100 million or more just on their DAF holdings.
Yep.
So they aren't that interested in moving that money through, which is all part of this structure we've discovered is so broken, but why so much money is sitting in DAFs. So,
Yeah.
they were skeptical of moving that money through. So we couldn't partner with them. So we just kept going until we found like real, and as David mentioned, we kind of realized that the nonprofit sector would be our partners. So it was finding those believers and the people who could come with us and who, were on the same path and had the same mission. And I think that's really important, not to get stuck trying again when you realize this is a door that's not open to me.
Yeah.
And we found the same with community foundations, really.
We had, and this actually, it is a really important lesson. Like we did sort of webinars with community foundations, and we talked to individual people at Fidelity. Everyone's very nice. I mean, these were not hostile people per se, but you could just tell at the end of it, it really wasn't going to go anywhere. And so for an hour of energy, we could either spend it trying to convince someone who basically was never going to be convinced, or we could take that same hour and talk to people that had a huge interest in seeing the success. And it's so much better to spend your energy on the second than the first.
It's so important, right? As community builders, all of us need to basically make a trade-off. Who to partner with, where to spend your energy, like who are believers, who are skeptics, who are in the middle. So what's your advice for partnership strategy? I know there's no generic advice, but based on your collective experience, both of you worked in large companies and now running this, writing books. Who should one partner with, and how does one find the ideal partners? Let's just stick to HalfMyDAF, because otherwise it just becomes too meta.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of the same. It is, instead of kind of beating your head against the wall, trying to get into people that are either sort of semi-listening or not really that interested, rather than trying to position it a different way or kind of get a different, go with the people who are like saying yes from the beginning. Don't worry about those other people. Listen to yes sayers. And so we did our initial webinar with nonprofit was hosted by Giving Tuesday. And they hosted a webinar for us, and we're like, oh, we're going to talk to nonprofits, which was at the time kind of strange to us. We didn't really realize that nonprofits would be such a force and such a partner. And they said, well, we think we'll have maybe 300 or 400 nonprofits on the call. And they had over 1,000. So we ended up, and we at the same time, this is a learning process, right? We realized how important it was to just explain to nonprofits what a donor advised fund was, how to think about your DAF donors, how to court them, how to make it easy for them to give, how to keep track of them in your database, all the things that nonprofits really should be doing, but weren't yet doing. So we started educating nonprofits. They were joining us with HalfMyDAF because it was an opportunity for them. So it's really just going with the yes, right, and following that.
Yeah. And I would say, I mean, building on exactly this. Sorry, I'm gonna shift our computer around a little bit. We have sun in the background.
Yeah,
exactly. There we go. That's better. I mean, trying to be, sort of methodical and disciplined about the characteristics of the people who are saying yes. So, I mean, the big picture, as Jen just said, it's sort of looking for the people that are, if a community is a group with shared purpose, finding out who else shares that purpose and plugging into their network, to their sort of pre-existing network. In this case, Giving Tuesday sort of had a network of nonprofits that sort of, surprised us by being as big as it was and seeing all the interest. If I could, I'll keep on, let me use Worldreader as just a little bit of a sort of other example of kind of how to think about it. So Worldreader, we're trying to get 1 billion people reading, and we're using technology, local content, various other tools to do this. And so when we look at our donors there, most of our donors they fall in the middle, if you can sort of think of a Venn diagram, of people who believe in reading, right? And you can start to identify people who believe in reading. They talk about books a lot. They hang out in book areas. These sorts of things. People who understand technology and believe in technology and technology's force to sort of do good in the world. And then prior to some more recent work, we would look at people who've given to organizations that work outside the United States, because some people give inside, some people give outside. Not so many people give both. So if we could find people at the intersection of all three of these, bookie, techie, international, there are people at the intersection of those. You can start to identify them, and then you say, okay, that's how we can sort of build our community of donors. We can look for people who satisfy all three of those criteria, and not spend any energy thinking about people who only give domestically, or people who don't believe that reading matters, or people who have no understanding of technology. So I think being a little bit disciplined about the criteria. Now, again, you don't have to over science this either. I mean, there's a little bit of intuition involved, but the big point again is try to identify what it is that kind of allows people to share your mission. And then of course, don't spend a lot of energy on the people who don't. It's just a waste of time.
I think and you think of who's your audience, and you get that audience, and then you go double down on them, because what we, once we realize, our audience is nonprofits, then instead of me on the phone with one nonprofit for half an hour explaining HalfMyDAF, I'd get on the phone with that nonprofit, or I'd get on the phone with people who represent so there's a whole fundraising groups and organizations that help assist nonprofits. I get on the phone with them, and then they can help me reach hundreds of nonprofits at once, rather than spend my time talking to one. So we just did a webinar. We're going to do another one to really kind of amplify the voice to our audience. So once you recognize who that audience is, it's like, how do I reach them broader, more easily? How do I,
Great point.
I think one concept on the fellowship we discussed was that you got to deliver outcomes. So I think when I listen to you, I think to me, the outcome is fairly obvious, even intuitive, but I would imagine that it may not be for everybody. So how does one convert somebody who would benefit from, say, an outcome, but is not still buying into a story? Did you both have that challenge at any point?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess when I think of HalfMyDAF, we've made it as simple sounding as we can, but it takes people some time. So it is complicated. And that
the name is incredible, though. I love it.
Thank you. Yeah.
It helps. Actually, it really helps, funnily enough.
Yeah.
It communicates a lot very succinctly, and that matters exactly to your point. I mean, how do you try to explain what the output is? Actually, the outcome is fairly obvious. More money going to nonprofits through DAFs.
Right.
Yeah.
And how do you make that conversion at the end, where I remember early on when we were mostly talking to donors, and they'd say, this was the height of COVID, when it was just starting. Oh, I have my plan. I've committed to giving over the next 3 years. And the conversion there was, look, that nonprofit's not going to be around in 3 years unless you give now. Give 3 times as much right now. And people, we'd kind of give that kind of hard love message to people. And we did convert people who then joined us and said, yeah, I get it. And started and became HalfMyDAF heroes.
There's something really, I think, and it's what you're kind of pointing at, Utkarsh, which is you can get, coming at a slightly different angle. Let's say one thing I've learned over the years, and definitely comes from making a lot of mistakes, is when you're creating something, particularly something you're passionate about, and obviously the work that we collectively are doing here as a community, and that you're doing as a community, you have to start with passion. Otherwise, there's just not, the problems are too big, they're too complicated. So if it's not from your heart, you're probably not doing it in the first place. Anyway, so you have almost you might call it a religious belief, a messianic belief in the power of whatever it is that you're focusing on. And the good news about that is it gives you a lot of energy. The problem that can create, though, is you can begin to assume that the whole world believes as you do, that this is just inherently a good thing. And you can see this a lot of the times when you talk to other people about their thing. When you're talking about your own thing, you can't see it, you're blind to it. But when you're talking about, when you hear other people, and you have to realize that some people, let's use climate change, for example, some people deeply believe that our planet needs to be protected. And so therefore, and for whatever, almost just ipso facto, just because it is, because we're stewards of something much bigger than ourselves. There are many people, however, who, even though they might believe that, they need to understand more explicitly why protecting our planet will help them or their community or their children. And so, and tying, this sort of big idea to some specific outcomes, often that have a direct impact on the person's life to whom you are speaking, can be really important. And it requires some discipline on all of our parts, because again, a lot of us want to talk. I would often talk about Worldreader and skip over the power of reading and just go right to all the different things we're getting to get more kids reading, and forget that for some people, quite a few people, they need to be reminded that reading, better reading outcomes equals better prosperity, better job opportunities, better health outcomes, better empathy, a number of different indicators. And depending on what that person cares about, you sort of have to think a little bit about how am I going to craft my message to make sure that I'm speaking to them, not really just speaking to myself.
Yeah, such an important concept. So the next section I want to touch upon is how do you both work together? So couples that work is a very interesting theme that I've written about in my book. I've written a few articles. I find the subject quite interesting because when you're a partner and a co-founder in an initiative, how do you really make that work? I think at one level it can be very obvious, of course, like you live together, work together, so it should be fine. But are there some best practices or ideas that you've both discovered working with each other? I ask this question because many of our community members will have to go and find co-founders. So any and all ideas will be helpful.
Okay, I have to say, so when we came up with this idea, we were very excited, but I felt like, oh no, how is this going to go? Because we have tried to work together, and there are a few things I will never do again together, such as cooking and hanging wallpaper and a double bicycle, like that's not a tandem bicycle, is never going to happen again. So there's definitely things that we don't do together.
Really?
And I was wary of how it would be. And yet I have to say it's been so amazing and so, really fun, and to have a shared passion. It's really invigorating and rewarding. And then our daughter also got involved, which is another added bonus, because she was home sheltering in place during virtual college, and she started to do the data entry of HalfMyDAF, and so she was seeing all the donors, and we talk about it over a meal, and so it really became a sort of a family affair.
Yeah.
And how do we work together?
Because one is democratizing reading, the other is a writer. Both of them come together to basically democratize, assets, financial assets for social good. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we were on, calls together, like we do these press calls, and I thought, oh, how's that going to go? Or even just doing this event, right? Like how does it go? And somehow we seem to work fine together.
Just a couple of thoughts on that. It's a really interesting. First, the couple thing is a particular version of a bigger thing. Kind of how do you build a high functioning team, and then if you add the husband and wife thing, that's a whole new level of complexity. But I think that something I have absolutely learned, over the years around building teams. And again, this is something that's taken me a long time to really kind of get in my head. Like for a long time, okay, so what's it? Okay, if a community is people with sort of shared, kind of shared vision, a team is a special form of that, because a team then has to really work together in a pretty tightly coupled way usually. And the idea of working together sounds so obvious, But I will say in a lot of my earlier career, certainly in my Microsoft days, maybe even my Amazon days, I tended to think of a team as more a bunch of individuals all kind of working on the same thing. And I would have these team meetings where they were kind of more like, and maybe Banu, you can speak to this yourself, since Banu, you might have experienced some of this, but a little bit more like of a sort of a group one-on-one, where like I'm asking a bunch of questions to individual people and they're kind of giving me a status report and I would kind of leave thinking, okay, we sort of accomplished the mission. And what I have come to understand much, much better recently is that a team really is about working together, like grappling with problems together and working on them kind of sitting side by side, like we are right now together working on this thing. And so so that's sort of just a bit of kind of general learning about kind of how I now think about teams, is this idea that you really are trying to figure out how to get people, the magic comes from the together part, not from each individual thing.
Right.
Then when you add the couple thing, I mean, that's, again, it's a little strange, right? Because like I've spent all my professional career, like, telling other people what to do and being the team leader and stuff. And if you bring that to your wife, it doesn't work super well. So then we kind of had to renegotiate a little bit there. And I think, as Jen said, I mean, it's actually worked out really well. I don't know that we have any magic formula to it, except trying to sort of stay out of each other's way sometimes when we.
The renegotiation sounds really interesting. You could tell us about it, because both of you, I think, for everybody's context, I think David worked very closely with Jeff Bezos in Amazon. And I would imagine both of you would have worked very closely with each other or with senior leaders in Microsoft during your time there. Mm-hmm. So you could perhaps, like, it's a very different setting, but now you work with each other. What does a negotiation really look like? I think it'll be helpful for couples, but also for co-founders when you sort of divide and conquer or decide who works on what.
Right. It really is so basic in some ways and so human. I think there has to be this common vision, a common shared passion. So that's the commonality. And then there has to be a sense of respect and support. So we each have strengths and weaknesses, and being able to recognize those and accept those and boost each other where we lack, and let go of control where someone else, is stronger. I don't think we set out to do that like explicitly, but that's what I feel is happening, is us working as a couple. And when I think of a team, I mean, I think it's so important. And I think I'm thinking of our family. And what I've learned recently is—
You have two girls, right? Both of you?
We have two daughters, and they're the next generation. So they're 21 and 23. And what I've learned is, wow, there's such a different generation. There's such a different perspective on the world and on how they think about things. Listen. Mm-hmm. So listen to and we have this shared goal, but listen to their perspective, and not only listen, but actually internalize it, take it in and act on it. And as we kind of move forward in how we act. So it's really, and I think that's true of any team. We are all people. We all have strengths and weaknesses and passions. And I think it's really respect and
yeah. Let's say a couple more things really briefly. And again, there's a book that I was thinking of. No, I wasn't really thinking of writing this book. It was a title that came to me years and years ago, which made me chuckle. Back when I was working at Amazon, it was called "Everything I've Learned at Amazon is Screwing Up My Marriage." And the point of that was, at Amazon, this is a particular culture that Amazon has, but very sort of competitive, very much like who can win the argument, who brings the best data to the argument, and then who actually uses that data to make the strongest argument. And that's the sort of winner of the meeting type of thing. Well, you go into that with your wife, your spouse, it doesn't work so well. It can't be about winning the argument. It just cannot be, because you'll never win that way. In fact, it's sort of a loser every time. And so I think now the way we work together, and I can see this over and over again, like I'll draft a piece of email and it'll be too long. And then Jen will look at it and she'll be like, this is twice as long as it needs to be. And she will edit it down and it will become actually better as a result. And then I will tweak it a little bit more and then I will send it or whatever it is. But we really have gotten to the point where, or she'll get super obsessed with something that maybe isn't the most important thing, in my opinion. And then she'll kind of say, you know what, David, why don't you just handle this? Because this is not going to work if I try to take this over the finish line. So I do think, it sounds kind of basic and maybe, there's sort of, not much there to talk about, but I do think having a really good understanding of sort of where you want to work together and then where you kind of want to go your own separate ways, and have the respect to recognize that each one has different strengths really matters, and being explicit.
Yeah. I think many fellows work with like co-founders or people who are very senior in practicality co-founder. So this advice will be super helpful. We have this concept of network capital community fellowship called scaling intimacy. And broadly, that means that once you expand as a community, it dilutes in a way. Clubhouse was amazing for the first 6-8 months, and now it seems a little random. Similarly for other social networks. So do you have any advice on when a community grows to a certain size, how do you sort of revitalize the culture? How do you scale that intimacy? How do you create the bonds between, say, donors and the nonprofits to be as strong as it were between, say, the first as well as the 1,000?
I hope we get to find that out.
I'm pretty sure you will.
Yeah, we're still early on that journey. Gosh, it's a great question.
Well, I think it's a good question when you think of Worldreader. I'm going to ask him the question because he has offices in India and Kenya and Ghana and Jordan and in Barcelona and San Francisco. So how do you, it's not really scaling, but how do you create that intimacy when everyone's so spread across the world?
Yeah, it's true. And we have employees all around the world. We have donors all around the world. We have readers all around the world. I mean, gosh, I might have to think a little bit more about that, how you really, do that over time. I mean, to a certain extent, look, it's probably inevitable that if you have, 10 million people, that you're not going to have the same feeling as if you have 10 people. But I will say that I might actually use Amazon as an example. When I started at Amazon, right now, Amazon's the second largest employer in the United States of America. So I don't know, Banu, you remind me from time to time, is the second largest non-governmental employer. So I think the military is probably the largest. I think if I remember correctly, in India, the railway system is one of your largest employers, right?
Yes, the largest by far. Yeah.
Largest by far, exactly. So any organization like that, I mean, it's maybe a community only in the sort of broadest sense of the world. But the question then becomes, I was employee number 37 at Amazon. And now I don't know how many, over 1 million people at the company. So, but when I actually run into I see Jeff Bezos from time to time. I haven't seen him in a couple of years now, but I've certainly seen other, like Andy Jassy, who's the incoming CEO, Jeff Wilkie, who was the other CEO up until very recently, other very senior people. And I asked them, how have they managed to hold on to their culture as they have grown so much? And so much of it, I mean, again, this sounds sort of so simple, but so hard to execute. So much of it's just being over and over again, super, super deliberate about it. Amazon very famously has these sort of Amazon principles that they print up and put in every single office. Jeff Bezos, when you talk to him, again, I haven't talked to him for a couple of years now on this topic, but he said the last time I talked to him, which was just as they were passing 1 million employees, he's like, I spend 80% of my time internally driving culture and talking about team organization and team effectiveness and how we continue to hold on to that culture. It's always day one. And so I actually think, I mean, if you're looking for case studies, I think Amazon is about as good a case study as you can get right now for how a company that has gone from 30 people to over 1 million people and still managed to hold on that same culture. I think they probably have more to teach than we do on this topic.
I love it, David. What I'll do after this call is we did a newsletter analyzing every single shareholder letter that Jeff Bezos wrote. It's going to be interesting because this does come up about how do you allocate your time, how does one go about it. On this concept that you're building, and what's your ultimate vision, and how are you explaining that? How do you storytell as a couple or as co-founders or as individuals? Are you able to enable people to see, say, 5 years from now, what this might look like, or that's not something on your radar today?
I think it's just getting on our radar. It's, you start something and you just have no idea where it's going to go. But because HalfMyDAF has grown faster and there's been more success than even we expected, that kind of gives us, I feel like, let me just say one quick thing before you jump in.
Yeah.
I sort of feel like between, HalfMyDAF and Worldreader and Jen's book about wealth, if you look at all three of those things, all of them share this common purpose of trying to figure out how to unlock and motivate and inspire people to do big things kind of philanthropically for other people, not just for themselves. And that, each one of them is a sort of a different thing. I mean, Jen talks a lot about in her book about how important it is to be open and sharing around money. Worldreader obviously is trying to take people's hard-earned money and also put it to good use to try to get billions of people reading. And HalfMyDAF is trying to inspire people to think much bigger about their philanthropy and earlier in their life. As Jen mentioned, our daughters are in it. So I don't know. I don't think we have sort of a perfect way to explain this just yet, but I think where we're sort of going is the intersection of all these is all about trying to inspire other people to sort of get, frankly, more comfortable when they have success in their life, and then think, how can I put this to highest and best use and really kind of unlock a lot of the potential, which is still locked up in so many ways.
I think when you ask about, where is HalfMyDAF going to be in 5 years and what's our vision, I think I want to say that to the fellows, like what we followed our immediate present passion. Like, what are we going to do right now? How are we going to do it the best we can right now? We weren't thinking ahead. We were thinking, what can we do now? And when we launched HalfMyDAF, it wasn't like, oh, we're going to start a movement. We're going to start. Right. We just followed what we thought was right. And we did that 100%. And, we weren't expecting to do this a second year even. We thought this is going to be we're going to give away $1 million. We're going to get help during this time of COVID. And it was sort of incredible where we started to get people, emailing us saying, well, can you connect us to your press department? Or can you, when you do this next year? I'm like, next year? What do you mean? It grew out of our path. It wasn't our intention. And so I kind of am a believer in following. I'm a big passion person. Follow your heart, follow what you know is right. Do your thing, do it well. And don't worry about what's going to happen next, because if you do what you're doing well now, it will grow. And where is HalfMyDAF going to go? So far, we've doubled what we expected to do. I mean, we weren't even going to do it again this year. And I have to say, this year, we're doing HalfMyDAF again, HalfMyDAF 2021. This year, we have $3 million to give away, thanks to the people who joined us last time who are giving more because they had a good experience, because they believe in it. Thanks to our daughters who gave us an incredible Christmas gift saying, we want to give money to HalfMyDAF. And thanks to all the other donors who said, we want to continue this. We want to be part of this community, and to nonprofits. And we're like, well, how can we get involved? So it's growing. And I think I'm still heads down and thinking, let's make this the best it can be. I'm not thinking ahead. I'm not thinking, how am I going to scale? How am I going to get this ahead? I'm thinking, I'm going to do the best I could possibly do for the organization or the HalfMyDAF challenge right now.
Yeah. And I think both are important. I mean, that's been true. It was true with Worldreader when we started. I had no idea whether we were going to be doing it 10 years later. I think even when I had joined Amazon, and when Jeff and I were talking in the early days, of course he had a big vision down the road, but frankly, 90% of his energy was like, how am I going to do my absolute best, every single day right now? That's the single biggest thing.
I just found this segment so profound because many of our fellows, and I think every CEO, every community builder struggles. Sometimes hard to predict what life will be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But looking at both of you, it seems that you can figure it out as you move along, as long as you're doing the best you can today with the resources that you have. It's true for Amazon, Worldreader, HalfMyDAF, and so forth. You said something really interesting, Jen, about how 1 became 3 million. This year, 2021, HalfMyDAF is 3. So can you explain how that happened? You told me they had a good experience. So how did you triple, basically? This is not so easy to do. So what are some best practices?
Yeah, so initially we had a woman that we had never met before who was running a foundation give to HalfMyDAF 2020. She added $100,000 to the matching pool. And we had 2 other couples come in. One added 100,000, one had 200,000. And as HalfMyDAF kind of grew, and that 1.4 million kind of inspired, 8 million to be given away. I mean, people saw that happening. They saw their money being matched to organizations that they'd never heard of, but sounded really cool and that were doing good work. And so the feeling of HalfMyDAF just was so incredibly positive. And people came back to us and said, yeah, we want to be part of this again. If you're doing it again, I'm going to come in with $500,000. So both the couples who joined us came in with $500,000. And the interesting part of this time, I think, is, our daughters joined us, but they got us thinking a little bit differently. We're still giving to anywhere other people want to give, but we also are showing up ourselves with our values, because our older daughter said, I'm going to give $500,000. I want it to go to racial justice issues. And our younger daughter said, I want my money to go to economic or to climate change and environment. And then when we talked to the other donors that were joining us, they were very interested in education in underserved communities and reproductive health. So now that 3 million, we're doing $1 million for anywhere you want to give. And then there's buckets for organizations that are supporting racial justice and education in underserved communities. So it's shifted a little, but I think that's a positive, because it is a little bit of us showing up. We're again saying, give to any climate or environment organization that you care about, and that there's money there to be matched.
Yeah,
Awful.
it's a little bit of kind of, sort of proceeding, adaptively is something that we would say at Amazon. Like, you put an idea out there, you kind of pour gasoline on the things that work, and kind of let it grow from there.
Beautiful. I think this is something that so many fellows should employ on a daily basis. It'll come in super handy. I don't want to keep you up too long on a Sunday, but do want to ask you a few more questions before the fellows ask. If you look at your past backgrounds, Jen, you wrote a really interesting book. I looked at the acknowledgements, the people who wrote. It was amazing to read, and then I read whatever I could before. It seems that both of you did have very interesting backgrounds doing what you did. How much does your past affect your future when you're building a community? Your Worldreader, Amazon, Microsoft experience, your experience of writing about Microsoft and a wide range of other things, is that a huge plus? If yes, in what ways does that translate?
Well, it translates into who you are. So it's, you are building from your past. And I think you can bring the positives there, and then the future and the present that you create, is based on who you are. But I think I've found with my book, so, I spent 14 years writing my book. It was a lot of introspection,
Wow.
a lot of time. It was a lot of figuring out, how do I talk about this thing, wealth, in a way that's not off-putting. So it was a lot of me with me. And over the last 18 months, it's been a lot of me talking to other people. And that's been completely different than my previous past. But you can always grow, and you can always learn, and you can always, shape who you are, in real time. And so I think I don't feel bogged down by your past. Try and look at it as a benefit that can bring you forward. And if you don't want it, you can also, I don't know, it's a little bit fluid, I think.
Yeah. Certainly when I look at, like, a lot of my life, I keep coming back to, a couple of themes around reading, which has been important ever since I was, 3 years old. And I can see that, how it's kind of played out, right? I was a literature major in college. I'd say I left Microsoft to go to Amazon because at the time it was a bookstore, right? So reading has been sort of a part. Technology has been part of my life forever. My mother, who was a single mom, literally bought, one of the earliest Apple computers so she could help start her own business and make enough money for us to be able to, sort of survive as a family. And that kind of got me introduced to technology. So, and then when you look at Worldreader and look at our donors and our community that we built around Worldreader, a lot of them are people that Jen and I have known from our Microsoft time together. I've known from my Amazon time. So there's a little bit of a sort of, there's certain things that are probably pretty deep in you, that like reading and technology, that just keep coming up over and over again. And that's a good thing, right? Because that's what's going to provide some of the stability and so forth. And then there are other things you kind of pick up along the way in relationships you sort of come to, understand and deepen. I guess the last thing I would say about this is it's taken me a while. In Worldreader, I spent a lot of my time fundraising. And it's taken me a while to really become comfortable asking my friends for help in fundraising, financial help or whatever it is. But I've come to understand, I'm super passionate about what I do. I hope they are as well. The worst that can happen is this, they sort of say no. So I guess my sort of point there, a little bit of an aside, is, don't be afraid to ask for help as you're kind of going along this journey, because your friends will be for you.
I don't know if you agree, but I've observed that being a contributor in major communities, say technology, literature, writing, reading, social impact, it's very helpful when you're a community builder because you can draw upon different insights
Mhm.
of capital as well and different ways of looking at the world. So
That's right.
I see, at least from the outside, among both of you, between both of you, that you do bring a lot of that intersectionality to the table. So I think that might help. I always say that be at the edge of the network often and try and contribute as much as you can, and the
Mm,
rest will take care of itself.
that's a good way to think
How do
about
you, how do both of you explain community and money to your daughters?
it. That's a big topic.
It is a big topic. It's one that, yeah, a lot of people ask me about. I am a big believer in values. And so we've always told our daughters that we're very fortunate. We are very fortunate. So they know that. But then when it comes to how do you kind of instill that, it's not a conversation. It's more of day to day, how you are walking through the world, how you, what you care about, your attitude, a sense of gratitude. So it's really, living your life the way you feel is right. Your kids will kind of pick up on that. They're watching you. They hear the way you talk about things. They see the way you interact with other people. So it's really living your values that I think is really important when it comes to teaching kids about money and wealth and what that means.
Got it.
I just
Yeah, you wrote a full book about it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is an area we could. It's way too late for you guys, but if we could do this for a whole other hour. But I'll do one other little anecdote that ties maybe two things together. When we, as Jen said, I mean, a lot of it is sort of is kind of a lived experience thing, and we're sort of intentional about that. But we've also, back to the community point, we very explicitly about 2 years ago reached out to a number of friends of ours on exactly this topic. And literally, I sent 5 pieces of email one afternoon, and within an hour, I'd gotten 5 responses. And they all basically said, what we said is, would you be willing to sit down with us, a couple, and have a long dinner or a coffee or whatever, and talk about your kids and how you're thinking about speaking to them about money? These were all people who'd also been very fortunate, many people from our Amazon and Microsoft past. And I mean, honest to God, I spent a lot of time sending email to people and asking them to have conversations with me about donations and stuff. Usually people take a while to get back to me, let's just say that. But in this case, within a couple of hours, 5 out of 5 couples had all said, I'd be happy to sit down with you. I never talk about this, and I really appreciate your outreach. And we had these incredible conversations with people that lasted for hours. And so again, this idea, this is where a couple of the ideas that we're talking about here all come together. I mean, we kind of came up with a bit of a strategy, again, too long to go into right now, but it was heavily influenced by conversations we'd had with each of these other couples about something that they had never talked really to anyone else about themselves, but all of us found very, very helpful to kind of share best practices among.
There's a book right here. You guys got to write it together. Community and money.
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously, Jen and David, this has been such a delight hosting you. And Bhanu, thanks again for making it happen. I learned so much. I mean, prepping for this interview was obviously a delight, but I knew David. But I mean, today I get to see both Jen and David together.